us now from Helsinki is Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and an MSNBC and NBC News international affairs analyst. I gobble up your tweets. They're sort of a lifeline in these topsy-turvy times, and I'm dying to hear your take on what we saw today.
I was a little too active today, yes.
It's good. We all are. What are your thoughts?
You know, I want to be diplomatic, but I thought it was appalling. I can't think of a better word. This was so easy, Nicole. This would have been so easy for President Trump. We had such low expectations for this summit. All he had to do was just push back a little bit on some basic things to look like he was defending America's national interest, our sovereignty. And instead, he chose very deliberately not to push back on Vladimir Putin, and on the contrary, lavish praise on him. And you know, I just look at this not as a Democrat or Republican thing, but how did the performance today advance American national interests? And I can't think of one place where that happened today.
I mean, can I just disagree slightly? I mean, I think the bar was even lower than what you described. All he had to do was not, you know, put on jammies and crawl under the covers with Vladimir Putin, and he couldn't do that. He didn't have to push back at all for his supporters and all the Republicans that we put up before to simply give him a pass. He didn't even meet his own low bar for not screwing this up. So take me inside. I mean, I spoke to a former advisor who was part of those early intelligence briefings with the president, said he always had a hardwired skepticism for the American intelligence community. And he said for the first time after watching the president in Moscow today, he thinks there's something else there that triggers Donald Trump's reflexive, constant defense of Vladimir Putin. Does that ring true to you?
I don't know the answer to that. That's why we need Mr. Mueller to finish his work. But it is very strange that we've never had a president ever speak this way about an adversary. And let's be clear, Vladimir Putin is an adversary. He's not a competitor, you know, he is an adversary. And yet our president today went out of his way to praise him. And when it was just teed up for him, just to, like, very colorful language, by the way, you know, you were not a diplomat. But when it was teed up for him just to say the very basic things, he chose deliberately not to do it. And that's what's striking to me, because, you know, I've been in those briefings with President Obama right before he walks out to do one of these interviews. Everybody knew what the question was going to be. He's sitting there with his top advisors. Their advice, I know some of those people, I know their views on this, and yet he chose to do something else. It's very bizarre and I think tragic.
Let's go there, because Vladimir Putin did on the dossier, and the idea of Vladimir Putin having compromising information about the president, because let's face it, a lot of people hypothesize that it's something that personal for Donald Trump. Let's watch and talk about it on the other side.
Yeah, I did heard these rumors that we allegedly collected compromising material on Mr. Trump when he was visiting Moscow. Well, distinguished colleague, let me tell you this. When President Trump visited Moscow back then, I didn't even know that he was in Moscow. I treat President Trump with utmost respect. But back then, when he was a private individual, a businessman, nobody informed me that he was in Moscow. Well, let's take St. Petersburg Economic Forum, for instance. There were over 500 American businessmen, the high-ranking, the high-level ones. I don't even remember the last names of each and every one of them. Well, do you remember, do you think that we try to collect compromising material on each and every single one of them? Well, it's difficult to imagine another nonsense of a bigger scale than this. Well, please just disregard these issues and don't think about this anymore again.
Just push it out of your silly little head. And since you already told me I was undiplomatic, let me just say that what Putin is talking about there is what some people refer to as the P-tape, the salacious aspects of the dossier, saying, I heard these rumors that we allegedly collected compromising material. That's what he's talking about. And he threw that out there today. Your thoughts?
Well, I thought his answer was very curious. He never denied that they had that material on him. All he said was, I wasn't briefed on when Mr. Trump was there in 2013. By the way, when I was ambassador, and when we would brief congressional delegations, other high-ranking officials, we'd tell them about Russia's tremendous capabilities to gather that kind of intelligence, including at the Ritz-Carlton. You need to understand that every phone call you make, every message you send on email, and every movement you make, even in my own house, every movement I made, I had to assume was being recorded. Now, I don't know what was recorded, but I do know that they have the capacity to do so. One other anecdote, by the way, I was at the Ritz-Carlton with President Obama in July 2009. That was his first summit then with President Medvedev. In order to have a confidential conversation in that hotel, we built a submarine-like structure that had no connectivity to anything in the suite that we then crawled into to have a conversation, just to give you a sense of what can happen, what we thought could happen in the Ritz-Carlton.
I traveled with President Bush to summits, not even in Russia, where Vladimir Putin was in attendance, and we had that kind of security. So the idea that Putin isn't spying on everyone is ludicrous. Let me ask you where we go from here. We now have the American intelligence community and the political appointees who run those agencies laying under the bus today, having to defend themselves and the integrity of their work product from an American president who just took Vladimir Putin's word over theirs. Where do those men and women go after today? Should they resign?
You know, that's a hard question.
Why is it hard? Why is it hard? Tell me why it's hard. Because the reason they were there, as even Anthony Scaramucci said, was to protect America from Donald Trump. Why is that a hard question?
Right.
It's been answered, hasn't it?
Well, because some of that. Well, those that have resigned and some of those people that I know are still working there. These are some of the people I've known for a long time. Their argument is always, well, if we leave, it's going to be worse. Now, I think that's a false proposition, right? I disagree with that analysis. But when you remember this from working in the White House, when you're in the bunker there and you're cut off from people like you and me, they're not listening to us right now, right? They're on Air Force One right now.
Yeah.
They think that they are serving America's national interest, standing there, sitting there like potted plants. I guarantee you, none of the people, well, I shouldn't say that. My assessment is of most of the people in the room today, when they were listening to the president, they disagree with them. But they get up tomorrow and they think, well, if I'm not here, it's going to be even worse.
That's absolutely right. And I think we've all had some lesser experience than what those aides had to have had today watching this president. Ambassador McFaul, we're so grateful to have you on all days, but especially today. Let's turn to our panel. Yeah. Matt Miller is a former spokesman at the Department of Justice, now a national security contributor for MSNBC and a prolific tweeter himself. John Cipher was the senior CIA officer who ran operations in Russia. MSNBC contributor Eddie Glaude, a professor at Princeton University. And joining us from the Washington Post, White House reporter Ashley Parker. Ashley, let me start with you. Your colleague Phil Rucker has also been essentially live tweeting this leg of the trip with some unbelievable observations. That press conference, I read Jonathan Swan, who was also in the room, said that there was just a palpable sense of shock at the president's answer that we played to AP's Jonathan Lemire at the top of the show. Your thoughts about the spectacle in Helsinki?
Sure. So on the one hand, there were indications of that this might not go exactly according to script. If you looked at the president's tweets, if you looked at his past comments, but to get into the spectacle, it is one thing to criticize your Justice Department, your FBI, the Democrats, the opposition party, the quote-unquote fake news media on Twitter, from the White House in the United States. It is another thing to do that not just when you are abroad, and you know there's that old saying that sort of politics stop at the water's edge, but when you are abroad at a summit standing next to Russian President Vladimir Putin, one of our biggest geopolitical foes. And that is what President Trump did. And the spectacle is that Putin, who is, a former Russian spy chief, he has a very good kind of dry, deadpan face. There were moments in that press conference where you almost saw a little flicker of delight, as if even he couldn't believe his fantastic luck that the president was standing there with all cameras trained on them saying what he was saying.
Matt Miller, I'm not sure that you agree with John Roberts on a regular basis, but you might today. He tweeted, "Whoa, there's an avalanche of you-know-what rolling downhill at warp speed toward Donald Trump over this summit. Republicans, even the DNI, are throwing buckets full at him."
Yeah, so what? We've seen this before. Remember last year when the president made his comments about Charlottesville and we saw an avalanche of Republicans?
That was the last time I asked who resigns.
Yeah, that's right. And nobody resigned. And a week later, everybody in the Republican Party forgot about it and moved on and acted like nothing happened. We'll see if the Republicans are actually willing to hold him accountable in the long term, whether they're willing to start calling administration officials up to Capitol Hill next week to explain what happened, to explain what the president's been saying behind closed doors, to explain how he's coming to the policy he's endorsing with respect to Russia. But I'm guessing we won't see any of that. I'm guessing you'll see them put out statements because they know today, like Charlottesville, was such a disgrace that they are going to have to answer it to their voters. That there are even going to be some Republican, voters who are a little appalled by what the president did, and so they have to put out a statement. But I guarantee you, what they're hoping is that they say one thing, and this goes away, and they don't have to answer for it again.
But how does this go away if the central, the late Charles Krauthammer wrote in his book that if you get the politics wrong, nothing else matters. And it was sort of a reference to the former Soviet Union. And it seems like the parallel now is if you get the Russia question wrong, nothing. I mean, if Vladimir Putin picked our president, does anything else matter? I mean, how do you move on in a week if you've got the most stark evidence to date that Donald Trump is on Team Putin, not Team America?
You're asking me? I think this is really a tough thing for our intelligence agencies and for our national security professionals. There's a general cynicism there anyway. I mean, when we work with politicians, there's that view in the intelligence community where we say sometimes you can lead a policymaker to think or to intelligence, but you can't make them think. But what's happened here is this is the first time we've ever seen a president who actually doesn't seem serious about his job. He doesn't seem serious about his oath. He doesn't seem serious about national security issues. It's all about him. And so it's going to be harder going forward. All of those professionals think and have been thinking that if I just do my job and I provide him with information, at some point we're going to turn the corner. And it's clear today that there's no corner to be turned.
And let me just press a little harder because it's more than that. The intelligence professionals that service this president view him as their most important client. And they think they want to serve him better. So all these, there have been stories, Ashley and her colleagues have written about the PDB having graphic representation. I mean, it's more than that. They don't just think if I keep doing my job, they think if I keep doing my job better. So do they continue to try to innovate their intelligence product to win him over, or do they look at what happened today and throw up their hands?
The intelligence community is a pretty resilient place. Most people are going to put their heads down and do their work. And yes, I truly believe they will continue to try to do a better job.
But to what end?
I'm with you on that. To me, I long ago saw what this president was, and I long ago believed that, he is what he appears to be. And so there are going to be people who just, probably should leave.
Would you tell you wrote that, let me put up a piece from your piece in The Atlantic, why American spies worry when Trump meets with Putin. For the intelligence collector, the worry is that the more Trump denigrates Western values and displays a sense of personal dishonesty, the less the U.S. looks like the better option. Why risk your life to provide information to a U.S. president who doesn't understand the stakes and doesn't respect the work of his security profession? Can you just draw that out for our viewers a little bit? People don't understand that lives are on the line, especially for our allies who provide intelligence that American intelligence operatives may not have access to in dangerous parts of the world where they don't have to share it with us, but they do because there are professional relationships among intelligence officials. Donald Trump seems to either not understand that or be willfully trying to blow that up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's two things here. There's one, there are intelligence partners that we work with overseas, the British, the Australians, others, that provide us tremendous information.
It's called Five Eyes, right? All the countries.
Absolutely, and there's a lot more. There's a lot of these countries provide us stuff that we can't get otherwise. And we need to take that seriously, and if you denigrate those people, you're making that more difficult to do. And in fact, those of us who work in the clandestine service who are trying to recruit spies to work for us, the one thing we have going for us is that we represent the United States of America. It's really easy when you work for a corrupt country to look at the United States as a place that I can go if I have information, if I'm upset with my boss, I'm upset with the corruption of my country. It's going to be a lot harder for our officers to collect that kind of information when we look like one of these third world dictatorships in some senses.
And that's my question for you, Eddie. I mean, did we stop being... John McCain's statement is interesting, and I traveled all over with him in 2008, where among his daily calls were calls from Saakashvili and others who depended not just on America, but on John McCain and Lindsey Graham and other members who worked to make sure that America would stand with the countries who had Russia as an adversary. It seems like in John McCain's statement was a subtext that we may have stopped being who we thought we were today.
Oh, absolutely. Illusions are shattering around us daily. We saw in very clear, stark terms today the crisis the country faces. Donald Trump, what he did today suggested that he is not committed to the oath he took, that the country that many people have so much faith in, right, that the country is on the precipice. We've turned our attention away from the TMZ video. We gave him a break. When it came to the Khan family, you gave him a break. When it came to Charlottesville, you gave him a break. And now here we are on the national stage, undermining NATO, right, fundamentally challenging the role of the country in the world. If you want to soft pedal, like the secretary did in our earlier segment, if you can't say,
deflect and distract,
right, what he actually represents as a threat to the country, then you are complicit.
Do you agree with that?
I do. We have been in a national crisis since he became president. And I felt a little bit like a dope this morning. I watched this and I was appalled and surprised and shocked. But we really shouldn't have been surprised.
Well, that's why this was so interesting. What the former national security advisor from the campaign said. He said, Nicole, this started in the summer of 2016 when he first went in and started taking selfies with the people who briefed him. I mean, this is not new.
Right. The surprising thing would have been if he came out today and held Vladimir Putin accountable. There's no evidence leading up to lead us to believe that he would do that. Sure, it was a low bar for him to clear, but he can't clear that bar.
Right.
Because if he did collude with the Russian government in some way, Vladimir Putin knows that. And forget the compromat. He can't come and hold Vladimir Putin accountable because he asked Vladimir Putin to do it publicly in the middle of the campaign.
Right. And on the same day they did it. Ashley Parker, let me give you the last word. And you write some of the best TikToks after these most dramatic moments of the Trump presidency. What sort of tidbits are trickling in from White House advisors about how this came to be today? He had to have expected a question like the one he got from Jonathan Lemire, and he seemed very prepared to say, I'm with him, Vladimir Putin.
So we're still reporting this out, but to put it mildly, this did not go according to script. Although the president's aides and advisors sort of know enough to know that he was likely going to veer off. And our understanding was that they prepped him. They showed him hundreds of pages of documents. They urged him to be very tough on Putin. And privately, they were saying to allies, here are the parts we can control, sort of maybe a generic statement that comes out after the meeting. But they sort of said, look, when it comes to the press, and they said this in advance of the press conference, but they said when it comes to this press conference, all bets are off. We have no control at that point.
Let me put up all the people he's blamed for election meddling. It's Democrats, Obama, China, the poor 400-pound person in his basement, and other people in other countries. So I'm guessing his staff was prepared for any one of those, but maybe not all the PDA for Vladimir Putin.
They had some inklings, yes.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.